Hello, my name is Mark Malott, and I'm the Director of Community Development for the City of Elgin, Illinois. The following is a presentation I gave to the Elgin City Council to address concerns with our code enforcement program. Before we start with how to improve code, we have to understand what's not working. First, our inspectors are afforded little to no room for discretion or judgment. First-time offenders are treated the same as repeat offenders. Lesser offenses are treated the same as more serious offenses. And this approach was understandable. When no notice was made effective in July of 2006, the program of the day was seen as too lax and not tough enough. But that code enforcement pendulum has swung too far. Along those lines, our current system is based on enforcement. Issue a ticket regardless of whether or not that would produce the ultimate goal of compliance. Next, our database was installed in the early to mid-90s, and it is extremely difficult to produce even the simplest of reports. Similarly, while we can report the number of cases started within a calendar year, 8,300 in 2013, and the number of inspections conducted, more than 15,700 in the same time, we do not have the resources to determine whether or not efforts are making cumulative improvements. Beyond the stories and generalities, are we making our community better? And more importantly, can that sentiment be quantified? The answer is yes, and I will show you how. Clearly, we need an improved approach to code enforcement. It's time to upgrade to Code 2.0. At a high level, because we're going to drill much deeper into this plan, Code 2.0 is intended to address the problems with the current program. It would introduce managed discretion, certainly not taking the code enforcement pendulum all the way back, but centering it, putting it into balance. Similarly, we need to shift the emphasis away from the citation to compliance. Importantly, this includes ensuring that, when warning and cooperation break down, inspectors have strong tools at their disposal. We cannot have a system of second and third chances that permit problem properties to negatively impact neighbors' quality of life. We will pursue the right technology for the job, respectful of cost and effectiveness. We have not and will not run out and get the latest, greatest software or tablets without a thorough evaluation of what that advance will provide. And fundamental to this program, we must be able to evaluate how we're doing. That goes beyond number of cases and number of inspections. Rather, it determines whether or not we are making a difference. We could know what is the typical work produced by a code enforcement inspector, and if we model that outcome with our existing conditions, what can we expect to yield? How much of an improvement can we expect? We set our goals of improving the condition of homes and property appropriately. Then we ask, did we reach that goal? To what extent? And if not, why? Code 2.0 can provide a high degree of accountability. You'll see more about performance measurement as we work through the presentation. So let's establish the framework for our plan. Again, each point will be discussed in much greater detail, but it's important to see how all the pieces work together. Again, fundamental and central to this plan is our ability to measure our performance. And working out from that tenet, we will focus on compliance, enhance our image, deploy the appropriate technology, and increase staff's capacity to produce results. First, our mindset must be on compliance. At properties where we haven't had problems, we have to engage our residents, not ticket them. Engage them in a dialogue that includes respectful education and explanation. Ensure the person understands and reap the benefits. After all, our inspectors are often the first interaction business owners and residents have with City Hall. They must shift their initial philosophy from that of ticket writer to ambassador, out with no notice and in with an opportunity to work with people. And central to this mindset is providing persons with the information of what are our expectations. That can be a dialogue we suggested moments ago, but it also needs to include using all forms of technology, from information on the city's website to using Facebook, Twitter, and other technologies as they evolve. It includes printed publications, from brochures, flyers, and handouts to newspaper and even magazine articles. And we need to provide a face, whether that's speaking to neighborhood groups or at code enforcement workshops. Finally, we must share our information with 311 so they too can explain why it is we do what we do. After all, education is an investment, and if we can prevent a violation from ever happening, we'll only be that much more efficient. and we will be able to measure those efforts, because a program can be created to cross-reference measured improvements at properties against how those improvements came to be. Was the property the subject of a code enforcement action? Did the owner receive a city grant? Or was that owner simply being proactive and making his or her own improvements? But when the chances run out, inspectors must have strong tools at their disposal. Where we find repeat or more serious offenses, inspectors must be able to rely on previously issued warnings or notices within a reasonably issued time frame. It's not reasonable to think that if you were told in the spring to keep your grass cut, then you cut your grass, that you'll get another warning when the inspector comes back a month later and finds overgrown grass again. And if it comes to the point where the inspector has to issue a ticket, then another ticket, and then another, is it possible that $50 every time you get caught running a business out of your garage is simply worth the cost of doing business? Perhaps the guidelines for fines for particular offenses should increase when those offenses occur within a reasonable time frame of one another. Similarly, perhaps those guidelines should suggest that certain offenses warrant higher fines than others. If outreach and warnings fail and tickets must be issued, should the ticket for having a living room sofa on your porch be the same as a restaurateur who is allowing grease to spill over a city sidewalk? Or should a garbage can left out too long be the same as someone who is working on other person's cars in their front yard all weekend? Next, we must improve our image. All too often, code enforcement is the bad guy. After all, who wants to have a visit from code enforcement? We have to turn that perception, primarily through the education we discussed earlier, to one of a partnership with the community. That will require us to reset our mission. What is our purpose? What do you think about when you think code enforcement? We must establish our brand. For years, Ford was built around the slogan, "Quality is job one." What is it that we want to do? We have to get the word out about our successes. When a building is demolished, was it because of the hard work of a code enforcement inspector? How many knew that the code enforcement inspectors pushed to have the former pepper mill demolished across from the fire station and V&A on Villa Street last year? Similarly, we have to be seen and be known. For example, we have to combat the generally unfounded disposition to code enforcement that says, "Oh, code enforcement, they're never in my neighborhood." Publishing online maps and reports of code enforcement activity, neighborhood by neighborhood, is just one way to do that. Or we have to ensure that a code enforcement manager joins the mayor when he walks city neighborhoods in nicer weather. And our written work must be professional. It must look like we know what we're doing, that a person of reasonable mind can get a warning or a notice and understand what is expected of him and her. Similarly, we have to ensure that inspectors are inspecting the same things. While no excuse, it only hurts code enforcement efforts when a landlord says to a rental license inspector, "That other inspector was here just last year, and he didn't say I had to fix that." Finally, working with neighborhood and business groups like the DNA and Chamber, not-for-profits, and local vendors offer many opportunities to establish a positive image of code enforcement. For example, we need to establish a network of assistance for persons of limited means beyond the city grant program. Where can an elderly person turn if they're having trouble getting their grass cut or if they have peeling paint? Or asking home improvement stores to offer a discount on particular supplies when those supplies help to close a code case is one way to extend a small bit of goodwill and drive traffic to local businesses. Third, we have to use appropriate technology. After much evaluation, we equipped our inspectors with Panasonic Toughbooks that dock on pedestals either in their car or at their desk. In addition, all personnel have been and are continuing to be trained with the 311 Salesforce software. And in short order, a suite of software from BasicGov, which is fully integrated with 311 and Salesforce, will replace Naviline and provide state-of-the-art software for code enforcement, licenses, permits and inspections, and the development process. Other efficiencies this new software will allow us to consider include landlord notification. If we can require an email address as a part of licensing a rental property, then can that address count as a means of serving notice? At the very least, that email could provide a landlord with notification that his or her tenants are not being very good neighbors. But these tools do little without the persons to do the work. To provide some perspective, resources for personnel in code enforcement have decreased since the first round of layoffs in 2009. Inspectors were 10 and are now 7, managers were 2 and are now 1, and support staff is now 1 part-time person when it was once 3 full-time employees. Of the current 7 inspectors, 2 are assigned exclusively to rental license inspections, which continue to explode. We currently have more than 4,300 active rental licenses, 740 alone newly issued in 2013. Having said that, we are keenly aware that simply hiring more full-time employees cannot be the only solution. We have to find creative ways to put more eyes on the street. One way we are currently exploring is contracting out discrete inspection services. In the same fashion we contracted the vacant building program, we believe we can contract out rental license inspections. If true, this approach would put 2 full-time equivalents back on the street doing highly visible code enforcement almost immediately. Next, we have to continue to develop our relationships with the fire department, the police department, public works, and even waste management. With these agencies, each having eyes on the street, imagine the effectiveness if we simply ask them to be on the lookout for and report in when they see our most egregious or impactful offenses. And this great example of one Elgin can be captured and documented through 311. Other persons and groups that could provide assistance include light-duty personnel, community restitution, and even establishing a system of neighborhood-based volunteers. Then, at the conclusion of those tough cases, we have to have the resources in place to move quickly. For example, we should pre-qualify demolition contractors and have a dedicated line item within the Community Development Department budget for such activities. Finally, we should conduct a residential structure and property maintenance assessment, a comprehensive assessment of the city's more than 27,000 residential structures and property to establish the baseline conditions within our community. The image on your screen is just such a study that I envisioned for Columbia, South Carolina in the late 2000s. With a manager and a team of 3 graduate-level interns from the University of South Carolina, we assessed more than 28,000 single and 2-family structures and property over the course of 1.5 to 2 years. Without this basic knowledge in Elgin, we can never truly measure the overall effects of our efforts. A residential structure and property maintenance assessment starts with a weighted ranking system for issues with structures and property. Importantly, that work would standardize the system to minimize differences during the initial and future assessments. From problems to roofs, to problems with windows, to problems on the grounds themselves, this system assigns numerical values to those field-verified issues. Then, property by property, those assessments are aggregated to produce an overall assessment of the structure and grounds. That assessment produces a much more thorough understanding of the conditions in neighborhoods and throughout the city. Those conditions are ranked comprehensively, then in perhaps more other appropriate manners, perhaps neighborhood by neighborhood, to clearly identify where greater resources need to be allocated. But once the baseline conditions are established, the work has only just begun. We would publish reports on the efforts of code enforcement, neighborhood by neighborhood, and systematically measure whether efforts are leading to results. Once a year, several thousand properties with closed code enforcement cases, closed building permits, and finalized grant projects would be reassessed, in addition to a statistically significant random sample of all other properties, the sum of which would determine if conditions are getting better or worse. Only then can we truly say if our code enforcement program is contributing to a high quality of life. And this is just for residential properties. The same effort would need to be undertaken for more than 6,400 commercial properties too. Finally, a comprehensive reassessment would take place every 5 years. In conclusion, we know there are circumstances when outreach and warnings would have been better tools than tickets. And we know that, under no circumstances, can we have a program where scofflaws get away with a slap on the wrist. Code 2.0 helps solve those problems. But more than that, Code 2.0 puts real numbers to the efforts of our employees. Code 2.0 provides a meaningful answer to the question, how are we doing? Think of the difference between the chief of police pointing to specific statistics that show that crime is at a 40-year low versus the chief simply saying, our community is safer. Code 2.0 will enable us to do that for code enforcement and more. Thank you.